Hello and welcome to this session with Aaron Knoll, all the way in Colorado. It is Gin Trends in 2020 and beyond for both the Craft Distilling Expo and the Gin Guild. It's great to have Aaron here today. He is the author of a number of books, including The Craft of Gin, Gin, The Art and Craft of the Artisanal Revival, 300, Aged Gin Cocktails, and what we're really talking about today, the 2020 Consumer Taste Preference in Gin and Botanical Spirits. Aaron, welcome, and would you like to tell us a little bit about the book?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. And, so the book really came out of this work I had done to kind of understand how people talk about gin, right? So, realizing that people talked about gin kind of in the abstract. They didn't have the same technical language that, distillers might. So they would say, well, this gin tastes floral. Oh, this gin is hot. This gin is spicy. So rather than just merely talking about gins on my website, I wanted to find a way to kind of abstractly communicate, well, what am I tasting? And if you know what kind of gins you do like, I wanted to encourage you to find other gins based on flavor that were similar. So in about 2016, I launched the ability for people to come to my website and search the archive of all these gin reviews that have these tasting notes diagrammed in this way. And after doing that for a couple of years, I noticed some very interesting trends. Like you could see some clear directions, what people were looking for, what people were not looking for, some alignment with what was out there in the world, some misalignments, some gaps, some opportunities for distillers. And seeing that there was really a dearth. I know a lot of, big companies do a lot of consumer oriented research. I just saw kind of this gap, in my work with distillers and talking with distillers, there's this opportunity to bring the consumer's voice to help them, to help you create a product, that meets a niche or that people are looking for, or, at least give you kind of that similar foundation that a lot of, the big names and big companies have, right? So I wanted to kind of bring the consumer's voice into the gin and distilling community. And so I publish this report every year where I kind of look at the data, not just my website, but other larger trends and, hopefully, help people kind of see what's happening out there. And, over the last few years, like just how much is actually changing out there.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because certainly as someone that's worked on a number of different gin projects, I've had some ideas where I'm like, yeah, it's quite good. And it's been crazily popular. And I've had other things done, this is a fantastic idea. And no one wants to know. So like, even just chatting to a few consumers or even just in your own mind is not really enough to necessarily work out what's popular. And I think like the real interesting thing for me is when you talk about what are these gaps in the market that are not being addressed, and also some, because I know that there's some aspects of the different demographics and these directions that different people have a preference for. So actually, the weight of the data, I think, is the thing that makes the difference as well. And having looked at, I've looked through the book and looked at some of these data that I've seen from other companies as well, UK ones, but a lot of them tend to mirror what you found as well. So it seems to be much more of a global thing as opposed to particularly centric to one country. But can you tell us a little bit more detail about some of the things you found out?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you're talking a little bit about market gaps, one of the most interesting ones I keep finding is that, I'm tasting and I'm enjoying a lot of gins that, have heavy spice profiles, whether you're coriander, cinnamon, anise, I enjoy them. But one of the interesting trends is that there seems to be a declining consumer interest in that flavor profile. Between 2017 and 2019, the preference for spice in your gin is down about 25% from where it used to be. And, and I don't see this really reflected, in the market at the moment. Another really interesting thing is we talk a lot about like gin and juniper, and it's, gin is juniper, right? And there comes to be like some really interesting insights, like people who really like a lot of juniper in their gin have trends that differ from the public as a whole, right? So people who search for like the most juniper possible in their gin also tend to be much less likely to like a floral counter note in their gin. And I think you were also alluding to like some of the demographic things. Age turned out to be a really interesting one. Gin drinkers over the age of 65 are significantly more likely to like a lot of juniper in their gin. But when we get to like the secondary, like those supporting flavor profiles, we also see that people under the age of 35 are much more likely to like floral in their gin than people older than that. I think, talking with some bartenders and other people in the gin space, there's kind of been this trend towards savory and the herbal character in gin. That trend is largely being driven by people under the age of 25 who are significantly more likely to like that flavor than people older than that. So, but age isn't the only kind of demographic trend we see. I think you do start to see a little bit of differences when we look at gender, right? Yeah. So, women are less likely than the population as a whole to like juniper in their gin, or a lot of juniper in their gin. This one, I think I've talked to some distillers and they find it surprising, but men are much more likely to want more citrus in their gin than kind of the population as a whole. So some of these trends, in a way, kind of counteract the prevailing narrative. We make kind of assumptions about gender, but I think that it's really, not that we should be marketing gin specifically to a gender, but I think, it's to understand your customer and where people might be coming from. I think there's an opportunity here. And some of these things I find surprising, honestly.
And from the data point of view, if I remember correctly from reading the report, the difference is relatively small. It's significant enough from a statistical point of view, but it's not, it's just a little bit either way, I think, is my understanding is.
Right.
And I think there was also something in that, again, in this small area, that spice was less favorable for women, I think. But I guess that it's just kind of a consideration of, if you have a very spicy gin, this is something to consider. That might be something like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the differences are all relatively small. I don't think you're seeing like a broad, men think this way, women think this way. Like it is, yes, women were less likely than the population as a whole to like spice in their gin. I thought, it's interesting, but the difference is, you're talking just a few people, a handful out of, 100. It does add up over larger scales, but I think that's, the information is powerful, but I mean, I think keep in mind, like, just the context of some of these, things. I think some of the age stuff is much more significantly different and might be a little more actionable. I kind of caution against making decisions on your marketing based on these gender trends. They're interesting and statistically real, but I don't know that it, directly converts into a bigger market automatically for a product, right?
And in honesty, like, I think directing a gin, thankfully you don't see it so much anymore, but right. 5-10 years ago, you speak to someone like, this is a gin, this gin's made for men. Like, so you're discounting half the market? I mean, this is a gin for women. Again, discounting half the market. Like, lots of different people like lots of different flavors, and I think whilst there is these marginal things, yeah, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean, in some of those earlier ones were garish stereotypes. I won't out, but like pink bottle must be for, it's.
Yeah, there's been a few, and some of those have disappeared now. So there you go. There's the proof in the end.
Progress, right? Yeah.
Great, and so going on again with trends, I think you were talking about something that's a bit more recent for 2020 that you've seen with regard to what had been very much an emerging category, but there's might be a bit of a change there. So can you tell us about that, please?
I mean, I would say if you asked me 12 months ago, looking at where the consumer was and what they were looking for, there was this groundswell for low, no alcohol cocktails, the mocktail movement. All of these things were kind of gaining steam, and it really felt like this was about to become a huge moment. But it does seem that looking at where the consumer is, especially in this kind of post-COVID world, I don't know that the trend was really, I don't know that I would say it's a enduring trend as much as it was a moment, right? So you look at holiday season 2019, mocktails, the sea lips of the world, these the immense amount of interest in these no alcohol substitutions, replacements, whatever, for to kind of mimic the spirit of the spirit you wanted to drink. And gin was uniquely well suited for it, right? The botanicals. So, but now kind of looking at what has happened, we're kind of seeing that interest in mocktails at the same time where people are saying, are getting out of their house, kind of resuming some element of normalcy, going back to bars. We're seeing everything else seems to be returning to some sort of baseline, but mocktails continues to regress in interest. So, am I going to say it's not a trend? Not quite there yet, but I would kind of approach it with caution. I'm a little less bullish on it than I might have been 12 months ago. I think really the proof will be in seeing where the consumer is at during this, upcoming holiday season. Certainly I know a lot of big brands are invested very heavily in it. And I think you're still going to see some influencers and the like kind of, pushing the non-alcoholic mocktail thing, but I think that whereas a year ago, a book on mocktails is the right thing to release for summer 2020. There's a lot of really good ones coming out, but I'm just not sure there's the audience I don't think is as receptive as it was. So, just kind of, I would say sit tight and watch where this goes.
I think to me, one of the changes that there has been, and I've heard the same thing and seen the same thing reflected. Basically, people need a drink, and a proper drink. That could be the argument you could make. Just really simplify it and really dumb. But one of the things I have seen in the last couple of months is an increase in the quality of and the variety of what's available. And I've been impressed. I've tried quite a few different ones. Some are definitely better than others. Others, to me, the cost of the value of the bottle, when it costs more than a small distillery's bottle of gin, doesn't represent value for me. In some cases. In some cases it does, in others it doesn't. But recently I've seen a much better quality. I think people have realised that the price system wasn't right, and so they're being a bit more competitive with that. So I was doing a judging for the IWSC last week. We had about 50 low and no different products. You've got things like Hazel's Gin, which has been out for a year or so, and is very good quality as well. So that's kind of a early trailblazer in that way. But yes, very much impressed with the quality of products that come out. And this that's come out, well, pretty much today or yesterday, the new, there it goes, the Warner's 0%, their Juniper Double Dry product that they've got. Probably the best juniper, very hard to get juniper without alcohol, exceptionally hard. So it's something which you could put with tonic that kind of moves towards that gin and tonic kind of serve. I think this is probably one of the best ones that's at a total 0% that I've come across. And I think it's £18 or something like that for 500 mils. So it's a much more competitive than it was. I had two, one after another. So, I mean, it's not...
but that's also fantastic, to see those products out there. Because regardless of what happens, whether this is a trend or a fad, we've all had, a friend who's going out to the bar, and she's not telling her friends, she's not drinking, or or sometimes maybe I don't want to drink tonight, right? And I think providing those options and those opportunities, mocktails or non-alcoholic cocktails are a staple. There's at least one or two on most good cocktail programs menus. And I don't see that going away, regardless of, whether this is the mocktail revolution or not. And I think that's really a positive trend we've kind of seen. Like our bars, our spaces where we enjoy spirits are becoming more inclusive. And I welcome that. And I think that's great. And I really want to try that product right there, because a juniper, that looks fantastic, honestly.
Just a quick curveball in here. We're going off piece now already. So you wrote the book on aged cocktails. Have you seen much in the trend in about aged gins? Because I mean, we, you know, when we first started writing, there was hardly any aged gins around. I think we did that tasting where we could get like 6 different ones, and we're like, wow, 6, and now there's hundreds. But is it getting much traction?
You know, I mean, I'll be honest, I still see it as really kind of a niche spirit. And I think, you know, even after having like written a book about it, cocktails, researching aged gin, it still really has a very small, you know, niche following. It's, you know, people are trying one-off things, you know, from a distillery that they like because they already like their product. You know, I still think we have a long way to go before it's going to be more in demand. And I think part of that is just, you know, cocktail culture. It really doesn't have a really great entry point to the consumer. And, you know, I mean, unless you're really drinking it neat, it's not behind bars. We're not like seeing the same kind of like bartender evangelism we are of, you know, other craft gins. I'm hoping that you know, I still remember when we had those 6 and we felt like the best people in the world. How'd we get all these aged gins? And, you know, right now there's hundreds of them and the quality of them is getting better. Distillers are being more intentional and deliberate with their barrel choices. They're not just throwing something in a barrel and releasing it. Like, the quality is getting higher. And I have faith that I think that's one of the things that will eventually make it easier and more accessible for people to get into. Just the average quality of a barrel-aged gin is far higher than it was, you know, no disrespect, but it's higher than it was 10 years ago.
And more innovation with barrels, different finishes, and wood types even as well. So, I mean, you bring up an interesting point there about the increasing in the quality. And I know you judge for a number of competitions, and I judge for a number of competitions. And certainly from my point of view, I've seen the quality of gin in addition, the numbers of gins that have entered these competitions is growing, but also the quality of the gin has also gone up, and you're starting to see less of like the real obvious sort of mistakes where you like have the thing and you're just like, oh my goodness. I mean, I remember the first gin judging we ever did together, we had something that was a bit like that, and but you just don't seem to see that as much as you used to. I mean, is that a similar experience for yourself?
I mean, I think that, you know, early on, it was not uncommon for me to get in a gin sample and maybe say, you know, I want to kind of chat with the distiller a little bit about this. There's something here that's, you know, I mean, frankly, not up to quality. Something's not right. You don't really see that anymore. And I think that's, you know, the maturation, like there's a higher quality professional education out there. There's more people out there sharing their expertise with distillers who want to be distillers. But, you know, I mean, it wasn't any of the competitions we did together. There was, you know, a smaller local competition, and, you know, I did a long time ago, and I was just very disappointed in the quality, and just, you know, it was deeply disheartening. And I really am, you know, proud to say, like, you know, I'm glad to say, like, you don't really see that anymore. So I think that, you know, and I guess, you know, also the market, like talking to distillers, right? It's not good enough anymore to just be good at what you're doing. Like, the quality of space, your competition is also gotten far better in the last 10 years. So it's, you know, I don't know, it's an encouraging message, but also like, you know, a humbling one. Like, you really do have to, I think you have to do your homework when you're making a product these days.
Yeah, makes sense. So move on to a couple of other different topics. So from my point of view, the big thing that we've seen, it was growing, and it's been growing for a while here, and then it really took off during lockdown, was RTDs, the ready to drinks, that combination of things that are kind of like a bottled cocktail, but also the little tins of whatever it might be. And I remember we did a tasting of 3 or 4 on a train one time, because that's how you drink it, you know, a canned gin and tonic in the UK. So we've seen a great increase, you know, a lot more brands coming out, and a lot of smaller brands as well, which is quite interesting. Whereas once it was kind of dominated by supermarket brands and the big, you know, the big larger companies, the bigger brands. Now you're starting to see, like, East Under Liquor, they've bought stuff up. Gin 58, they've got stuff. Chase have got stuff. Forest Gin, and there's probably many I'm forgetting, and I'm sorry if I've forgotten you, but there's really Eden Mill producing lovely stuff as well.
I mean, it really is a beautiful thing, and seeing the opportunity for smaller distillers to be getting into it. I mean, I think just in the last few weeks, like I had a really made a dry fly out of Washington, really good canned gin and tonic. And, but it's not just gin and tonics, which I think is the really exciting thing. Lee Spirits, also out of Colorado Springs here locally, they have a line of, they have a lavender lemonade that uses their lavender-based gin. Again, it's not just canned gin and tonics. It is a whole array of ways you can enjoy gin that are now being, and I think it's really fantastic, for portability and people who choose not to drink beer but still want to bring a 6-pack to the beach, which that's me actually. So true story right there. But it has been really exciting to watch, and I think the consumer is ready for this, and I think it's just an opportunity to get gin kind of into more contexts and more places where, cocktails normally couldn't have gone. And so, but I mean, I also really love some of the new products from the big names, like Tangeray's Florida Gin and Tonic is also fantastic. So it's just raised the bar across the whole space, honestly.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. And I think this innovation moving just beyond the straight spirit and mixer. So like I know Boutique Gin did the Collins with the yuzu lemonade. There's that little twist to it, and those sorts of things like that. Some gin tonics with a bit of grapefruit or something like that. I think
long drinks.
I know you're a big fan of the long drink, so which is a sort of it's like a sort of bitter grapefruit soda tonic kind of thing, isn't it? Mixed with gin. But yeah, it's great. These variations. I think having that little extra flavour seems to help quite a lot with the RTDs. And then the thing that we've started to see here is kind of, I mean, everywhere's going for hard seltzers, UK and the US, and it's been for a little while. But we're starting to see gin seltzers here as well, which is, to me, is what I want a hard seltzer to taste like. But I would say that, right? But yeah, very good examples from Chase and from Gin 58, particularly their grapefruit one. I think is just delightful.
I mean, and I think it's really just, I think, larger awareness of a trend that was already happening in backyards across the country. Like everyone's drinking their LaCroix seltzer, and it pairs very well with spirits. And so if you like, you want to lemon something with your gin, why not put it with seltzer? So it's really taking a trend that was kind of existing off trade in backyards and places that people don't see. And, I think this comes like from listening to your consumer. I think it's fantastic. And
I mean, I've been mixing stuff with this. For those that don't know what LaCroix is, a flavored sparkling water, but it doesn't have any sugar in it or any sweetener either, I don't think. And then like if you go to France, like you go to like Perrier, and they'll do like a mint Perrier and an apple Perrier. I mean, the mint Perrier, fantastic, like bourbon, a bit like a mint julep kind of thing. Getting off the gin, sorry everyone. But yeah, you just kind of think, why has someone not done this before? But any gin seltzers in the US yet? I haven't seen anything.
If there is, I don't know it off the top of my head. You got me right.
Come on.
You mean you put me on the spot? I haven't, but I will say, I see them ordered at bars all the time. And when you talk to bartenders, like this is a thing that's happening frequently already. So, American Distillers, I didn't find one when I Googled it. Maybe you should, maybe here's an opportunity, right?
If you're watching. You said about going to the bars and people having gin and, I guess, what do they order it as, a gin and soda or gin and seltzer? Is that how you would order it in an American bar?
Yeah, I mean, gin and soda, you got to be careful. Some places soda is a stand-in for Coke, and gin and Coke, while a wonderful thing, isn't always what I'm going for,
No. So that brings us on to what I would describe as beyond tonic, which is what I've written in my notes. I mean, I know the relationship between gin and tonic in the UK and in Europe more broadly, and what it is in the US is not the same. I know it's not always. I mean, you tell us a little bit about that. It might be just helpful.
Well, I mean, I don't think gin and tonics, gin doesn't have kind of the same cultural space in the United States for, it has, was a niche spirit for a long time. I think, one of the interesting things I see, like when I talk to consumers or when you talk to someone who doesn't like gin, the two have become so entwined that there's people who don't like tonic who think that because they don't like the flavor of tonic that they don't like gin. And that's really the great opportunity, like that these gin and seltzers and these gin plus whatever else has really opened up. People are recognizing that there are other ways to appreciate and enjoy this. And I think that, the bitter note of quinine is distinctive. It might even be an acquired taste. Bitter flavors aren't, the most accessible. So I think that it's really nice that gin and tonic, I think, is a beautiful marriage, but I think it's time for the two to amicably just kind of maybe, they can still be friends, but, but they don't have to always be together. And I think that's really a huge opportunity here in the local, in the United States, I think, just, and possibly worldwide. I'm sure you're seeing that over there too, right?
Yeah, we've seen, gin and soda we see a bit of, again, because in comparison to tonic, it's so dry. There's no sweetness at all in it. So you either have to work on that or, again, that's another hurdle to get over. I've seen some people kind of do a 50-50 mix. That's one option. But starting to hear rumblings more and more about the gin and cola. And I know there will be some people who, if they were wearing monocles whilst they're listening to me say this, they would have dropped and it would have smashed. But genuinely starting to see more people talk about it, more people try it. And in honesty, it works. It works as a combination for a lot of gins. Because of, if you look back to the history of cola or Coca-Cola or whichever, even just generic cola, and it's all, there's spices and there's some herbal things, and it's a botanical soda, basically, or at least that's kind of, where it started off at. And so it actually, to my mind, works really nicely with the juniper, that crispness. You can still, if you want to serve it in the coupe, in the goldfish bowl, sort of big glass, balloon glass, you can still do that, and it works really well. I just think it's another option, and sometimes I think to myself, I fancy a gin and cola, and other times I think I want a gin and tonic. But they pretty much have nearly as much sugar in anyway, so there's not much of a difference there. And I still think that you can taste the gin. And in honesty, tonic water is full of sugar and citric acid and quinine.
Neither mixed drink is going to be like your low calorie solution, but when I drink my gin and cola, I really like the kind of the drier colas, like Q Cola here stateside does a really nice, very botanically driven cola that I think pairs fantastically with gin. And I've been drinking it with gin for way longer than I've admitted to the gin community writ large, right? Because there's kind of a stigma to it, right? Like it's the unclassy and, and I think this is, again, kind of that going back to just making the community more inclusive. You are in denial if you didn't believe that gin and cola was being drank in backyards and in people's living rooms across America. Or across the world, honestly. Like, it's a thing that people have been doing for a long time. And I think it's really good for us to kind of recognize it and talk about it and and bring it out here to the limelight, not the limelight, maybe the forefront of things. But yeah, gin and cola. Maybe it's the drink of 2021.
It is. I was speaking to a very well recognized and very established gin expert, a lady called Kelly Rivers, who set up Whitechapel Bar and is now working for Sipsmith in America. And for Negroni Week, which was last week, she converted me to a small Negroni with a Coke back. And I thought that was rather lovely. So I call that the Negroni River. But it actually works very well. Again, something I would recommend people to try. Really don't knock it until you've tried it, but I think it's definitely something worth trying. And we see some people like mixing it with lemonade, or what we would have sparkling lemonade, as you would call it, but more lemonade like we would call it in the UK. And other things. I think it's just worth a bit of experimentation. Iced tea can work in some ways. don't limit yourself to just one thing. But I quite like the lengthening is quite nice. And okay, I think ginger ale has been quite established. I think quite a lot of people like that. That seems to be the acceptable alternative to tonic, whereas Coke's still a little bit, oh.
But how come you haven't mentioned gin and juice yet?
Well, I thought I'd leave that for you, Aaron. I thought that.
I think that drink speaks for itself. But I mean, but you're right. Like the lengthening of the drink, and I think that does speak to what might have been the driver of something like that. That mocktail, low alcoholic trend was like the more of the conscious consumption. And I think that if any trend does last out of this, it will be the kind of consciously consuming, not consuming to excess, kind of like picking deliberately. I'm going to drink this in this way, and I'm not going to drink 10 of them, but I'm going to drink 2 really good things, right?
Drink less, drink better, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. And then one other thing, I mean, as I think we mentioned, I'm here in the UK, you're in the US, but I know that both of us get particularly excited about gins that are from other places in the world, Australia and South America. And again, 10 years ago when we started writing, you just couldn't get gins from these places. But now you're starting to see these hotspots. There's quite a lot of gin coming out of Africa as well. And it got me thinking about gin regions. And I had a recent conversation with Caroline Chudley, the gin queen, about Australian gin. And just tasting through some of them, it really made me start to think, actually, and I'd written about it quite a few years ago, there is something to this. And it's not just, we're going to try and use Australian botanicals in a really extreme way, like to really push it as far as we can. But it just seems to become just more natural and more just part of the gins that they're making. It's part of their identity. And I wondered if that was something that you had seen, and if you'd seen it in other places, or if there's regions where they make a lot of gin and they don't really have that.
Well, I mean, I think there's a certain allure to making a spirit truly regional, right? We've seen that, whether it's French wines or what have you, like, yes, making something about our place tells an evocative story and creates a niche that other places you can't tap as easily into. So I think we are seeing a deliberate attempt to kind of create this. I'll say, yes, when I taste an Australian gin, I'd say across, maybe the 80 to 100 I've ever tasted, like there is something that does kind of taste or read as Australian to me. Sometimes it's the botanicals. Sometimes, I think you've talked about, it might be the base spirit or distilling from grape or something. But there is something that kind of reads as that to me. But on the other side, I think back to, the United States about 10 years ago, where we were trying really hard to make an American style of gin. And for a while maybe there was some kind of alignment going that direction. But I mean, I think gin is really interesting, is that although there might actually be an Australian style of gin, there's nothing stopping a distiller in Sydney from saying, I'm just going to put juniper, coriander, angelica, maybe some cinnamon. Like, they can make a gin that doesn't read as regional. It reads, as, traditional London dry or something else altogether, which makes it very different from other types of regionality, we began with, like wine, for example. So, and aside from Australia, I think I just want, I would point out, like, I think another country that's really trying that approach is South Africa right now. Mm-hmm. Emphasis on, lots of local botanicals that are found nowhere else in the world. Yep. And that really affords distillers an opportunity to just do something that you can't easily do elsewhere. It makes it very easy to kind of establish that regional flavor. I don't know, as gin becomes bigger there, it'll be interesting to see if it holds or if it even grows in the way I think Australian gin has. But, so the answer is like, yeah, it's a thing, but it's also not a thing. It's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think that's part of the great thing about gin. And I think that's why it's having this kind of global, I would say, when I was about to say global resurgence, but I don't know that's quite true. Some places it's a resurgence. Some places I think it's coming up for the first time. I don't think gin has really been such a big thing for places like South America and stuff. I don't know there was this one time this great gin, and I think now there's a bit more of that going on, which is quite exciting to me. So, but I would agree. I think it's growing somewhat. I think there's always this limit because gin can essentially be made anywhere. But you look at things like products that are sort of flavored with grape in the way that the Four Pillars Bloody Shiraz is, and there's certainly a number of more of those that are on the market and things like that. And so you do start to pick up, to an extent, their generalizations, maybe even stereotypes. You know, that slightly sort of herbal, sort of myrcene kind of thing that you get from some of the gins. A lot of the gins that use different cinnamon or lemon myrtles, that kind of, that notable note. Those are what we're talking about. Yes, but I think there's still plenty of time to and opportunity to do whatever you really want to do, and that's really the exciting thing as well. One of the regions I've been very interested in recently is Italy, and I think there's quite a lot of. It's always struck me as odd that no one's really paid that much attention to Italian gin until very recently, and actually there weren't a huge amount of small distillers or even any distillers just making gin until the last 5 or so years, maybe. And it seems so odd because they have all the raw ingredients there. You've got the juniper, you've got the citrus and all these lovely things, but it's only until very recently that's been happening. But there's some exciting stuff going on there.
Right. I mean, it's the irony of all the distilleries sourcing their juniper from the one place that doesn't use it locally for their own gins, and their proximity to so many other great regions that have been making gin for so long also makes it something of a surprise, you know. But when I'm talking about places that I don't think see places where gin is kind of emerging, I'm really struck by seeing about 5 years ago, pretty much if you looked at who was searching for gin or coming to my website, it's pretty much exclusively European and US, Canada, maybe Australia. Where I'm really seeing the immense growth is in Asian markets right now, like Singapore, Thailand, even China is getting up there, India. It's very interesting to see that in parts of the world where we don't normally, whether stereotypically we don't really think about them as large gin consuming cultures, there is a surge of interest in gin and gin drinking and gin cocktails. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, if, in the next 10 years, I think those are going to be some of the places I would keep an eye on, Italy also. But I mean, I'm really looking to Asian markets. I think there's immense opportunities right there. And there's a huge amount of consumer interest, almost disproportionate. There's more consumer interest than there are craft distillers in these places right now. So,
yeah, I think great point about India. I know there's some really fantastic gins that are out there already, but I think there's a lot more in the pipeline. I know Aaron is doing a talk for this Gymposium 2.0, so I'm sure that would be very, very interesting. And he also makes fantastic products, Hapusa and Greater Than as well, both two lovely products. So, well, I think that probably wraps us up for the trends and what we're seeing going forward. I guess just finally, as we finish off for 2021, if you were going to sum up what you're expecting.
Oh, that's a loaded question. No, honestly, in 2021, what I'm kind of expecting to see is that, as people kind of get back to normalcy or whatever that is, I'm expecting to see a resurgence of, or at least a tendency of people to go to comfort products, familiar things that they, whether they associate with the better times or they associate, with, being safe and, that sort of stuff. So look to see people kind of looking for those old comfortable standby cocktails that have been with them through thick and thin, right? That's my hot take, but then the researcher in me is let's sit, hold tight, let me look at the data, and I'll get back to you on that one.
I'll finish with my just in the air, no research based at all. I think RTDs will continue. I think they will continue to gain momentum. I'm intrigued as to if much other things sort of come up for the winter months, because a lot of them are quite summer focused. I think that the no and low will have some recovery, whether it will be back to where it was. But I think the underlying trend probably that will come back. Quality, I think, is going to increase, which I think is fantastic. That's the most important thing. It's great for everybody. It's great for all of us. Whereas wearing the sprig with pride. And I think the other thing that we'll see is, and we've had a bit of it this year, is you'll start to see increasing innovation from some of the larger distillers. I mean, in the last couple of years, we've seen new products from Plymouth and from Hendricks and from Tanqueray 10 and Gordon's and Tanqueray and a lot of others. People that generally were a lot more reticent about bringing out new products. I think we're going to Bombay as well. Can't forget Bombay.
Yeah.
Generally, we're a little bit more reticent. I think we'll see more of those sorts of products coming out as well. And I think that's partly driven by the fact that people want something new. Like, yeah, I know about your product, you know, something like Beefeater. Beefeater, great gin, know about your product. What's this Monday gin? Oh, it's a much longer maceration. And that's, you know, these new things for the real informed consumer, the gin connoisseur, that's what they're looking for. And they're happy to spend their money on it.
Right. I mean, I think it's a keen recognition that one of the things driving a lot of the consumer interest in craft brands was novelty, experience, and storytelling. And I think it's only natural that we see some of the, you know, the big names kind of picking up on that and releasing quality products that tell an interesting story, that, you know, are novel, interesting, not like something that other people have had. And I think as long as, you know, that's a trend I don't see changing. Consumers are still interested in novelty and trying something new. And that's one of those, that's been a driver of gin for a long time. And I still think that it is and will continue to be. And I think that, you know, experimentation and with a good story, I think is going to always have at least a willing ear and a willing first taste and a second taste if you make a high quality product.
Exactly. That's what does the second taste. Well, thank you very much to Aaron for joining me. It's been absolutely great to speak to you. I think it's fair to say that 2020 probably still got a few more surprises left for us. But I'm really looking forward to 2021 because I think we're going to see some really fantastic and innovative things. And I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you, everybody.
Me too.